Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night to everybody wherever you are in the world. This is an international webinar, so we're expecting people from many different countries and many different time zones. So welcome everybody to this 2020 ECFS and World Bank webinar on food security and food policy implications of COVID-19 crisis. I'm sure most people are aware, but just to repeat, this webinar is to present the results of 7 case studies which have been carried out by ECFS researchers around Eurasia over the spring and summer. So a very intensive period of work for the people who have, the researchers who have developed these presentations today. Full copies of their presentations and their papers, their research papers, will be available in due course on the ECFS website, so you can all look out for those. We've only got 1.5 hours for this session, so we're going to move in quite quickly. By the way, my name is Jonathan Wadsworth. I'm speaking to you from the World Bank in Washington, DC, where I'm a lead climate change specialist. Hopefully everybody has seen the agenda. I'm not going to run through it, but in very briefly, we'll have a session of introductory remarks from some important people. Then we'll go into the 7 presentations. They'll be quite short, 5 minutes per presentation plus 2 minutes for questions. So for those who are listening in and watching, please write any questions down in the chat box during the presentations, because we'll be looking at those and then asking a couple of questions at the end of each presentation. Also some housekeeping for you to be aware of. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a translation button. So if anybody wants to listen in Russian to the English presentations or in English to the Russian presentations, just click that button and pick the language which you prefer. Please keep muted all the time, because there are often problems with feedback, and keep your videos off. I think those are the main things that I need to mention in terms of housekeeping. So let me see how many participants we've got already. There are almost 70 participants already online, but we need to start now. I was told that there are something like 190 people registered. So some people may drift in or maybe having problems getting online. But I would like to start right now with opening remarks from Frauke Jungbluth. She's the practice manager for agriculture and food in Europe and Central Asia of the World Bank. And when Frauke has made some opening comments, we'll get some opening comments from Professor Sergey Shoba, who is the director of ECFS at Moscow State University. So if I could invite Frauke, please, to address everybody with some opening remarks. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and participate in this webinar. COVID is projected to dramatically increase the number of people in food crisis in 2020, and it's likely to actually be protracted for 21 and 22. So this impacts coming on top of a rising trend of hunger and food insecurity in many countries of the world that already were created by climate change, conflicts, and other economic shocks. So this topic that you've chosen for this year's case studies is really very relevant and will be with us for quite some time. The webinar that we're here today presents the results of the 5th round of annual case study projects under the ECFS and the World Bank partnership. So these case studies that we will be presented in a moment are research projects that are undertaken by researchers, professors, lecturers, representing universities and research institutions in ECFS countries. And they actually largely try to achieve 2 objectives. to provide updated information on current relevant issues on food security in the Eurasia region, and to prepare and collect an educational material that can be used for food policy programs and programs that are discussing food security. This year, as Jonathan already said, there's 15 researchers from 4 countries that prepared seven case studies. Through the years, ECFS has, through these case studies, built a knowledge on food policy and food security considerations in the Eurasia region, and also, contributed to building capacity on, on the attention to these issues among Eurasia researchers, to analyze food policies and their implications as, in a timely manner. The case study project also aims to foster collaboration between researchers from various countries. In addition to preparing the studies, several seminars and workshops have been held for between the researchers to learn from each other. And even this year, there's 2 studies where researchers from 2 countries actually have collaborated jointly to prepare the research papers. In addition, there has also, in January 2020, there has a training course that took place for competitively selected 15 researchers that, to train on methodologies and programs that can be used. And a similar event will happen again in December this year, but it will be taking place virtually. So thank you all for the hard work that you've all been doing to lead to this event. And I look forward to learning more about the case studies that will be presented. Thank you. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Frauke, and we're really happy to have you with us today to see what's been happening and to get first-hand experience of this process. Do we have Professor Sergey Shoba online? I haven't seen him, but maybe he's there without my knowledge. So Sergey, yeah. If you're there, could you please make some introductory remarks?
Да. Спасибо, Jonathan. Hello.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Distinguished colleagues, on behalf of the Eurasian Center for Food Security, I would like to welcome all the participants of this webinar dealing with the impact of COVID-19 on agriculture and food security. Today, we will discuss the outcomes of our research, our case studies dealing with exactly this issue. In fact, we started this effort this summer and we worked together with the World Bank. I'd like to stress that throughout the recent 5 years, we've been heavily involved in this exercise. We've been doing research and we've been producing case studies, and those case studies deal with extremely relevant food security issues, relevant for our region, Eurasia. And these case studies appear to be quite successful, which means that our work, the work we've completed this year, proved in high demand. We received more than 500 applications for the case studies. And obviously, these studies are quite useful and important not just for academic purposes, but they are widely employed in day-to-day activities. Currently, we already have about 20 plus such case studies available on our website. As to the topic for today's webinar and today's case studies, well, clearly it has to do with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The world has encountered an unprecedented challenge. Disruption of economic ties, disruption of logistics, regional challenges, devaluation of some national currencies, all these contributed to the overall economic downturn in many countries, including leading countries of the world, to say nothing about less developed economies. It is common knowledge that that the countries have experienced a dramatic decline in productivity. In some countries, the decline of the GDP was quite significant. Now, the situation is exacerbated by social unrest in some countries. And as I said, the topic we are to discuss today appears to be extremely relevant. Now, the case studies you're about to hear about are quite varied in terms of topics. We have colleagues from Uzbekistan, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and the case studies touch upon a lot of various issues, such as trade, school feeding programs, food chains in vegetable production, livestock production, and so on. Thus, I believe that our efforts and our today's webinar will produce another major impetus to future research, to future case studies. I'd like to wish every success to our colleagues who will present today. And I'm looking forward to a successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shoba. That was a very inspirational few words of encouragement to everybody, and it was amazing to be reminded that there were 500 applications to take part in this year's round, which is an amazing testament of the great interest there is in these case studies. So now I'd like to go to a friend of most people who are on the call, Artavats Hakobayan. He's senior agricultural economist at the World Bank and has been in Moscow for many years. He's been a great protagonist in this whole case study approach since its inception. And so he's going to give a brief overview of the program. And we look forward to hearing that before we move into the specific presentations for today. So Artavats, could you take the microphone and the floor, please?
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for your very kind introduction. If you allow me, I will switch to Russian for my brief presentation. Добрый день, добрый вечер,
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished colleagues. I'm Artavats Hakobayan, and I'm an agricultural economist at the World Bank, and I supervise a joint project implemented together with the Eurasian Center for Food Security. This is a joint project between the ECFS under the Lomonosov State University and the World Bank. I'd like to give you a brief update, and perhaps I will walk you through the key factors that contributed to the advent of this project, this case studies project. But before I do, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Eurasian Center for Food Security. I want to thank Professor Shoba personally for his leadership and guidance, especially in these difficult times of the pandemic, when we all have to work in the virtual format remotely. Yet, we seem to be able to arrange and deliver such webinars and continue our work, which is crucial. And the ECFS once again proves its leadership and its capabilities. It invites colleagues from literally all over the region to attend such events, the ECFS provides this convening platform, which is precious. I'd like to thank our peer reviewers. I'd like to thank our reviewing commission who have been working with our authors. I'm referring to Jonathan, Roman Romashkin, Pavel Sorokin, Derrill Watson. They put their back into this effort. They worked hard, and they worked together with all the case studies authors. And they provided a lot of useful input, helping to make the case studies better. My special thanks go to our colleagues, Anna Belova, Irina Prusas, Sergey Karakin. And I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody, but these are the people who work behind the scenes, and they provide tremendous support to this entire exercise, and they ensure success of our efforts. We will hear our authors, the case studies authors. Now, all these 7 case studies this year appear to be brilliant, and they contain a lot of useful and important information. I thank you all very much for the work well done. I know that many of you wanted to employ those case studies in face-to-face interviews, in your field work, in your regular face-to-face interactions, but obviously now it is impossible due to the pandemic. Nonetheless, it is clear that this joint effort is a success, and we're about to learn from you as to the outcomes of efforts. And last but not least, I want to thank the Finance Ministry of the Russian Federation for providing financial support to those initiatives, for being a long-term donor and partner. Thank you for a tremendous support you provide to the ECFS. Distinguished colleagues, we launched this whole project some 5 or 6 years ago. Now, this initiative crystallized about 6 years ago, and the key idea back then was as follows. At that time, we were putting together master's programs on food security to be rolled out in Eurasia. And at that time, we could not find up-to-date and relevant case studies or research projects that would deal with food security. Later on, we decided to launch a number of research projects that could be used for training purposes, that could reflect the state of affairs with the food policy, and that could serve as a working document for various stakeholders, public officials, other researchers, anyone who might be interested in food security. Now, the case study format was picked on purpose. The case studies are supposed to be very brief. I looked through the names of the participants, and many of you would be very much familiar with this format, but also have some newcomers. Now, look, we opted for this format, for this brief format, because many people who would be reading those case studies would not have enough time to do some in-depth research or to wrestle through volumes of information.
To focus on the main objective of the case. And what we got in return? In return, we created a format which can be used by the students, by the undergraduates, in the framework of their courses on food security. And they can use that in role games when they choose the most appropriate solutions, studying the questions raised by the cases. Also, as an output, we see that these cases can be used by the civil servants for their own work in order to obtain some information or to assess certain options in terms of policies, etc. This is the format which we have applied for the cases. And this format fits two objectives, and the previous speakers already spoke about the main goals of the case studies. This is, first of all, about the training and presentation of these cases. Initially, we used the cases from the Cornell University, but we improved this example. Many of you, as far as most of you are practitioners, acting as professors and associate professors, and I do think that you are extensively using the Cornell University cases, and you can make sure that first several stages of the cases are published on the website of that university, and they serve as a good study material and sometimes are even more updated and relevant compared to the ones which were produced before. The questions which were selected within the cases, the topics which were selected for the case studies are relevant, are up to date, and usually they come from the real life. These are the real questions which are raised by the decision makers, by the politicians. And usually such questions are burning and they require prompt resolution. When we developed the technique for the case study, we dedicated only 2 months to our authors from the very beginning and ending with the end product to elaborate on the issue. The authors start their work in June, July, and by September, the case has to be submitted for editing, for the expert analysis. Such a short-term approach initially was not very much welcome by the academics, but I see that subsequently many authors now tend to like this approach because it is very concise, very precise, and very focused on the topic. Another important thing for the cases is about the cooperation between the authors and different universities. And we see that most cases have more than one author. So usually a case would be co-authored by 2 or even 3 authors. And there are multiple cases where the authors are employed by various universities, and usually they would be representatives of different nations. For instance, within that case study, we have authors from different countries. And another factor behind these cases is that the authors, they were introduced to each other within the Eurasian Center for Food Security. That's very important because it means that the platform set up by the Eurasian Center for Food Security is really operational, is really working, meaning that the authors can get to know each other, can exchange some information and cooperation in the field of research. I think that this is one of the biggest achievements made by the Eurasian Center for Food Security. And the last but not least is certainly about a very thorough expert opinion, thorough analysis, which is done for every case. As I said, we have very authoritative commission which studies all the cases, and they are the main defenders of the methodology of the cases. Certainly the methodology is updated and improved every now and then, but I take pride in the commission because we have representatives from the World Bank, from the Russian Academia, from the National Academy among the members of the commission, and they're working together. They ensure the quality control, and the cases would undergo very thorough expert review, and our authors can only confirm these my words. The results have already been listed, but let me generalize what's been said. At the moment, we have 29 cases, bringing together 60 authors from all the focal countries of the food security program. There is a platform which brings together all the authors, and also we set up a training system. We held the very first training last January. The very first training was held offline, and in December, the second stage of training will take place. Unfortunately, it will not be offline, but hopefully in future, we will shift to the offline mode once again. And the training is aimed at the practitioners, lecturers, instructors on the case methods, on how to promote the cases within the courses which are being offered to the students in the universities. I communicated to the authors of the previous cases who got trained within our program, and they said that they are using the case-based approach in the training, in the instruction, and they are using other instruction methods as well, the ones which we promoted within this our project. Dear colleagues, I'm very grateful for your participation. We usually hold this seminar in the framework of the annual conference of the Eurasian Center for Food Security. Unfortunately, this year we failed to do that offline in persona, but I see that there are 92 people present at this webinar. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being part of this initiative within the Eurasian Center for Food Security. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Artavats, for your comments and overview of the program so far. I think that gave everybody a good background to where we are for this current round of case studies. So I would remind everybody, I forgot to do this at the beginning, this webinar is in fact being recorded, just so that you're aware. And now I'd like to move straight into the presentations. So we'll start with a presentation on the case study of urban food security and COVID-19 crisis, the case of Uzbekistan cities. And this has been prepared by Etenesh, Asfaw, Ina Rudenko, Marina Lee, and Fatima Sayadovyena. I'm very sorry for my very poor pronunciation. I think I almost pronounced that last word in Spanish. So please take it away, whoever of you four is going to do the presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm trying to share the screen, but it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Anna, can you? So hello colleagues, my name is Etenesh and I will be presenting a joint study done by myself, Marina from Tashkent, Ina from Urgench, and Fatima from another city in Uzbekistan, entitled Urban Food Security Amidst the COVID-19 Crisis. And the problem that we want to address are the new challenges that urban food systems face due to the COVID crisis and lockdowns. And these challenges were revealed in our empirical study, which we did in July during the lockdown, where we saw that food security was an issue among city residents who had no access to food because the food was unaffordable. Although food was available, but because the price of food went high, city residents were not able to afford the food, but also city residents had to cut their food budgets because most of them were out of work, and also they had unstable diets. This is the second screen, which shows that from the study, more than 60% of the population or respondents were not able to buy enough sufficient food because of the cuts in their budget. And this is another slide that shows food was unstable. Next screen, please. So our policy option is that we came up with 5 policy options, and all 5 options are towards building a resilient urban food system. This is mitigating managing city food stocks, and by why cities should do that is for contingency purposes and to stabilize the price and to continue the flow of food. The other one, which we came up, is urban farming. This is to localize food production and shorten the food supply. The third option we came up with, urban productive safety nets. This is to allow vulnerable people to be able to buy food and continue with their purchasing power. The other one, which we came up with, uninterrupted food trade, because trade is a very important factor to move food where it is needed. And the fifth option we came up is to liberalize the staple foods, which is wheat in our case, to give opportunity for the private system to come in and get opportunity from it. Next slide, please. So what does this imply for stakeholders? It implies to ensure food storage, and it implies efficient information exchange on food stocks among storage systems within cities. It implies continued social protection, job retention, and monitoring of the vulnerable in cities. It also implies keeping food trade flow and allowing supply of food in urban cities. And again, for stakeholders, it implies promoting urban farming, allowing policies and incentives that support food production in unconventional spaces. And it also means continue the recent wheat liberalization reform that is started in many countries, including Uzbekistan. So next slide, our key message is think long-term and think beyond the crisis and focus on building resilience as a cornerstone to build urban food systems, and also be transparent in policy interventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Etenesh, and thank you especially for keeping to time. That was wonderful. That was great. So very interesting presentation, and there's an interesting question coming through from some of the participants, and they would like a little more information on what exactly does urban farming mean. While you're thinking about that, let me just say that I'm in DC, in a city in the United States. This summer, I have a very small garden on my roof, but for about 3 months, I didn't buy a single tomato, a zucchini, a lettuce, or any kale or cucumbers. I was able to provide myself completely with my own family supply from the roof of my house. So please give us your definition and implications of urban farming.
Thank you, Jonathan. So what we mean by urban farming is trying to grow food in unconventional spaces, as Jonathan said, maybe on rooftops or on small gardens within our balconies, and also processing those food and keeping it for winter time. And so for Uzbekistan especially, that kind of practice is there, but we are calling for more urban farming using vertical farming ways and support for that kind of indoor production of food where it is near to the food users or customers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to have to press on. I don't think we have time for any more questions just now. Sorry about that. So we'll go to our second presentation. Thank you very much, Etenesh. And we'll go now to a presentation on the case study of school meal program, the school meal program, sorry, in Armenia, specifically about challenges, measures and policies to mitigate the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the researcher and presenter for this is Anatolyi Maksimov. Please take it away, Anatolyi.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники
Good
вебинара.
afternoon, dear participants in this webinar. Let me present for your presentation case school meal program in Armenia, which we do in order to study the programs to assess the measures taken in order to mitigate the crisis and to offer how we may arrange for the school meals amid COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. In the social economic context, when the unemployment is more than 26% and then the poverty level is more than 30%, we may see the school feeding program is a very important tool for supporting most vulnerable social strata. The school feeding program was started in 2010. And as far as the schools were prepared for taking care of that on their own, they were passed over to the national school feeding program, which is funded from the public budget. Before the crisis of COVID-19, the school meals were offered to more than 120 school children in spring 2020. Amidst the COVID-19, the schools stopped the operation 2.5 months ahead of the summer vacations, and they started working 2 weeks later after the summer vacations, and it is on November 13th that they started working, and they are working every second day. And therefore, the school meals were not offered. In order to promptly react to COVID-19, a special program was taken in order to monetize the school meals and to offer grants to the initial school, primary school children.
Поменяла свою тактику и переходит на разовую раздачу продуктовых наборов, состоящих из 6 продуктов. Но следует отметить, что учащиеся в школах...
It should be stressed that school students participating in a national program are left without school meals. International experience suggests that there may be several options to arrange meals under the COVID pandemic. First option would be to ensure distribution of individual food items for cooking at home. For instance, in Tajikistan, under a school's meals program, flour and vegetable oil are provided. Second option is formation distribution of take-home rations. Option number 3, monetizing school meals and providing cash. For instance, in some Russian regions and in Armenia, families were provided with cash to buy food. And finally, ready meals could be provided. And this is what the United States and Finland did. Clearly, each option has its pros and cons, its risks and its benefits. We believe that the best possible option for arranging school meals programs in Armenia would be to use take-home ratios in coordination with providers who had won respective tenders. The Ministry of Education, Culture and Sports of Armenia, in coordination with
важно предусмотреть ряд последовательных шагов, которые перечислены на данном слайде. Пожалуйста, следующий слайд.
Took up a number of steps in order to facilitate implementation of such program. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic could be addressed by providing take-home rations to school students under a nationwide program. Such sets would allow to maintain a supplier's infrastructure for the provision of food. It would also ensure targeted use of funds allocated for school meals. And finally, it will help maintain the previously achieved level of nutrition. However, the immediate actions mentioned in the previous slide would not be sufficient to mitigate the pandemic impact. In the medium term, it is important to set up a crisis-resistant model to organize and finance a school feeding program with participation of local businesses and communities. In the longer term, a crucial component of a national policy would be development and adoption of a national standard of nutrition for school students. A standard which would ensure equal quality nutrition for all students in primary school, irrespective of school's location, number of school students, or level of income of their parents, and the crisis conditions. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anatoly. Great presentation and almost on time. I was just about to say, please wind up, but you did. Thank you very much indeed. That was great. So we've got one question coming through in terms of the costs of running the school feeding program and the trends in terms of the budgets of the school feeding program. Maybe if you could just comment on those two questions briefly, that would be interesting for people to hear.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think I did mention that the school feeding program in Armenia comprises two parts. First, it is a program supported by a World Food Program. This program has been on since 2010. And the other part is the so-called National School Feeding Program. Now, this second part, on a daily basis, some 140 drums are allocated per student. Now, the WFP provides resources not only to procure food for schools, but also to develop infrastructure, to upgrade kitchens and pantries, to procure cooking equipment, to train cooks, to develop various rations using local inputs. So, well, I can give you the numbers for the WFP, but I don't think we should be guided by those numbers. I think we should look at the financing provided under the second component. And once again, this is 140 drams per day per student.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that people will be able to get much more detail when they see the research paper, which is very complete in that respect. There are other questions coming through, but we don't have time to address them on the webinar. You could take a note of them, Anatoly, and maybe if you get a chance, reply to some of those in the chat to the people who have asked the questions. Thank you very much.
Спасибо.
Let's move on to the third presentation, which is a Russian case study, and it's about the transformation of the marketing system for ecologically friendly farmers' products caused by COVID-19 in Russia. And two researchers put this case study together, Natalia Nesterenko and Sergey Meloyan. And so I would like to pass it over to those, to the presenter, to make their presentation on this case study, please.
Добрый день, уважаемые участники вебинара.
I would like to welcome all the webinar participants. I wonder if you can see my presentation.
Да, все хорошо.
Right, we can see the presentation. Once again, I welcome you all. The case study deals with the transformation of farms' marketing system. We wanted to look at the family eco farm located in Leningrad region near St. Petersburg. At the outset of the pandemic, the farm experienced a dramatic decline in sales volume because of disruption in their contractual relations with grocery stores. People were reluctant to buy their products because they were afraid of the virus, to contract the virus. Under these circumstances, the farm realized that it did not have sufficient knowledge, and they didn't know how to use e-commerce opportunities. Possible policy options are listed here. These are based on the issues we have identified for the farm during the pandemic. And the policy options call for the participation of various stakeholders, that is governments, NGOs, consumers. I should stress that direct financial support that we looked at as an option is kind of hard to implement because agro-industrial complex enterprises are not eligible for such support. Instead, we think that direct information support and institutional support would be more feasible and would yield better results. We suggest to arrange a number of capacity building programs to develop e-commerce skills. A platform could be developed together with local governments and the business community, which would allow to promote the farm's products at the regional level. This would benefit both consumers and the farmers and businesses. Now, a very important player comes to the fore, and that is the delivery agents or companies who would be bringing the products from the farm to the groceries and to the users and consumers, while farmers themselves are in a position to ensure a reliable delivery to the end users, because farmers don't have vehicles, they don't have logistics capability, they don't have sufficient staff. In fact, regional governments could provide additional support through promoting tourism, because tourists, I think, will be willing to buy the farmers' products. In addition to spending some leisure time on farm, the visitors could provide additional revenues for the farmers. Now, the policy options that we describe here take into account interests of virtually all stakeholders. As to policy recommendations that we believe to be the most relevant and effective are as follows. We identified 3 recommendations. There's training programs and information support provided by the government and NGOs. This would allow to train farmers in e-commerce. This would expose farmers to digital channels to be tapped. And also this would help to search for suppliers that might encounter some issues during pandemic with delivering their inputs. Another option, or recommendation rather, would be to set up a digital platform for joint sales of farm products. This would help develop an ecosystem for farmers' products and boost demand. One other important recommendation is to procure excessive farm products for social sector institutions such as hospitals, orphanages, and so on. Now, the key message for policymakers is as follows. Supporting farmers allows to promote entrepreneurship in rural areas. This helps to ensure food security. This benefits vulnerable populations, and this helps to set up a resilient ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for that great presentation, which came over very well. And you stuck to time perfectly well. Thank you. It's very difficult, just to mention this for all the presenters and all the participants, how to get 5 months work of research and a very large and detailed research paper into a 5-minute presentation is really difficult. But so far, all the presenters are doing a fantastic job. So there may be some questions in the chat box in Russian, which you understand, Natalia, which I certainly don't. But maybe if I could just put a question: how did the particular case study was a farm case study, and this was a really interesting, innovative approach by them out of need, because they were in a position where their sales were dropping, their income was dropping, but they had to keep the farm moving forward. So was that farm actually in danger of going bankrupt at any point, or were they able to get their e-commerce business moving quickly enough to save themselves from ruin? because they were quite innovative in using Facebook and Instagram and other things, but they're not really the most common platforms for e-commerce. So any comments on that?
Thank you, Jonathan. Now, this particular farm seems to be pretty stable in terms of its situation. They pursue e-commerce. They trade via social networks. Well, this is not your standard e-commerce, because those guys, they collect orders via Facebook and they deliver the orders themselves. And the major part of their sales is with grocery stores. However, the development of e-commerce in cooperation with delivery services is something that regional authorities could help them to expand. And this is where they have a lot of promise. Unfortunately, there are some constraints that prevent this particular farm to deliver such orders on a daily basis. Well, they cannot deliver to St. Petersburg, for instance. It's kind of hard for them to do. Yeah, there is a question in the chat whether such platforms exist in other Russian regions. Well, look, the government of Leningrad region is putting together its own platform promoting regional products, promoting e-commerce. Whether it is an approach that is widely employed, well, I cannot tell right now. I think that this platform is still in the making.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalia. I think we're going to leave it there for now, but I encourage people to read your research paper. I think it's very interesting. Thank you again.
Спасибо.
So now we'll go to the fourth presentation, which is from Armenia, and it's the impact of COVID-19 crisis on nutrition of Yerevan's population. And the researchers were David Pipoyan, Seda Stepanyan, and Meline Beglerayan. And I think David will be the presenter. So let me ask you, David, please, to take the microphone and give us your presentation.
Thanks a lot for a very interesting presentation. And now I would like to go through presentation. Oops. Do you see my screen share? No?
No, not yet.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So our case study is the impact of COVID-19 crisis on nutrition of Yerevan's population, Republic of Armenia. First of all, I would like to introduce the problem statement. It is known that COVID-19 has until now have negative impact not only on food security, but also nutritional status of the population. And particularly the countries who already face this issue can have negative effects. So the selection of the city was related with the fact that it's a capital city and also 1/3 of the population resides. And the diet survey, COVID-19 questionnaire was developed and 471 surveys were conducted. And the results, the outcomes, unfortunately, are not very optimistic. It's obvious that 29.9% of the people, consumers, have had food deficit, and 42.5% have been forced to change their favorite food with a cheaper alternative due to financial reasons. So overall, during the COVID-19 confinement, the dietary habits of population of Yerevan have been deteriorated to a greater extent than in more developed countries. And now I would like to introduce our policy options, which are related, of course, with policy issues. So, due to the fact that this case study was elaborated within the frame of this case study was elaborated the questionnaire, and the objective was to obtain results and have policy options which are result-based. So our first policy option is collection of evidence-based data for assessment of COVID-19 impact on dietary patterns and quality. Unfortunately, neither the Ministry of Health nor the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs don't have such kind of databases, and we have investigated all the programs which were directed to aid to struggle with this situation, but the ministries have a lack of this information. And unfortunately, only our pilot study, only our results are not enough to have evidence-based, policy elaboration. So the continuous correction, of course, it's one. And unfortunately, the world was not ready in that period, but we have investigated that different countries, of course, they had different approaches. Some countries highlighted the issue of, hygiene, strict measures, social distancing, etc., while in other countries highlighted also the importance of healthy eating habits due to the fact that the vulnerable groups, particularly for disease, morbidity, and mortality, are the diseases which are highly correlated with the nutrition. So investigating different countries' approaches, particularly the China approach related to e-commerce, Italian approach, particularly the Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, they come together to notice ensuring the normal circulation of agricultural food commodities. And our third option is the promotion of enhancing consumer awareness on nutrition. And I have to say that investigating the whole picture, particularly the raising campaigns, awareness raising campaigns of COVID-19, they were directed mainly on measures of hands, mask, social distancing. Unfortunately, there was not any information, neither related the link between nutrition and disease, mortality and morbidity, and also food patterns during self-quarantine, which is extremely important for policy implementation level to increase the coherence and coordination. So stakeholders, of course, would include communities, civil society groups, the private sector and farmer organization, and the fight malnutrition and hunger, a combination of policy implementation instrument and public awareness campaign.
It seems that we have some connection troubles.
Information is highly important. So the Ministry of Health must be responsible for data collection, but of course the linkages, particularly the cooperation with research institutes, academia who are dealing with data collection, networking is highly important. Another option is establishment of joint technical task force or interdisciplinary working group, the government related to COVID impact on nutrition. And of course, this working group must be inclusive, not only state stakeholders, including the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Economy, which is responsible for agricultural policy, Ministry of Social Affairs, but also international donor organizations like World Food Programme, World Bank, FAO, of course, from private sector, producers, retail. This joint technical task force must be really very inclusive in order to elaborate multi-level framework to combat against problems caused by COVID-19. And our final policy recommendation is healthy diet-related information, which must be elaborated and must be disseminated with different tools, not only TV, but also on social media, particularly young consumers, they are more active in social media, but this, and of course, elaboration must be coordinated from the Ministry of Health. And the final part, key messages for policymakers. The consumers in Yerevan exposed to food deficit due to financial reasons. But of course, there was also some deterioration related to lack of information. That's why we have to prioritize the support and protection of vulnerable and most exposed groups. Unfortunately, we have investigated all support programs, and none of these programs was directed of malnutrition and nutrition status. State programs of assistance should consider national aspects and requirements and urgent need for elaboration of national guidance on nutrition, which is missing in Armenia. And mean awareness regarding nutritional information is low, particularly related to link between nutrition and disease. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, David. I'm sorry there were some connection issues during your presentation, but you kept going very well. And I think everybody got your main messages, which are very clear. I'd got a question, a very quick question. We've got to sort of stick to time, but one very quick question, if you just make a comment. You quite rightly emphasized the need for evidence and a good evidence base in order to make policy. That message comes over very strongly. And in Armenia at the moment, the relevant authorities don't seem to collect the sorts of information which you've been collecting in this small, relatively small pilot study, short pilot study. When you discussed that with the Ministry of Health, what was their reaction? Did they say, thank you very much for this? Or did they say, well, thank you very much, but we're okay anyway?
Yeah, thank you.
What was their reaction?
This question is really very interesting. This question is really very interesting, and I had a discussion both with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Social Affairs. The fact is that coronavirus pandemic in Armenia, particularly starting from 17th of March, we had self-quarantine regime, and you know that the ministries were not ready. So the first that, like as a mistake, yeah, when in Iran and when in Italy, it was already known that there is a COVID, unfortunately, they didn't take into consideration the seriousness, and you know that in March also the World Health Organization's decisions were contradicting. In Armenia, it was the first problem that type of contradictious information. And starting from April, the ministries were not ready. And when they started the programs, unfortunately, they didn't have any program which envisages the collection of evidence-based data. And you know that I didn't have enough time to introduce the methodology and methodological approach, but our investigation included also financial sources of consumers. So we had different financial incomes of different families, and we discovered also the link between financial incomes and, of course, dietary patterns. So it's obvious that the consumers which were exposed to a pandemic situation, particularly in the field of HoReCa, hotels, restaurants, yeah, were they exposed, but the government support programs were not directed to nutrition-tailored aid programs. For instance, in Big Report, we mentioned that the government provided support to all consumers for gas, for electricity, and for that was unreasonable program due to the fact that a lot of consumer without any financial program, so they used that funds, but unfortunately the programs didn't meet the challenge of nutrition. And the ministerial approach, that usually in the ministries there is a lot of democracy, a lot of steps in order to establish a program. And this year was really very extremely difficult year. But anyway, even we are trying to investigate also campaigns, particularly related to public awareness. But it was really extremely funny sometimes that even when all the roads were closed, there was a publicity that when you plan to go abroad, select only countries, and a lot of publicity which was useless in that period as all the borders were closed. But the only private nutritionists were providing information related to nutrition, mortality, morbidity, the diet during self-quarantine, the diet during...
Thank you, David. Thanks. Thank you very much. I hate to cut you off. It's all very interesting, but I've got to move on to the next presentation. So thank you very much indeed. That was a great presentation, very stimulating. So let's move on to the fifth presentation now, which is another Russian presentation from Moscow State University about regulation of wheat exports in the context of COVID-19, prepared by Sanat Seitov and Sergey Kiselev. So we look forward to having this presentation.
Добрый день всем. Меня зовут Sanat. Мы совместно с Киселевым Сергеем Викторовичем подготовили
Good afternoon. Together with Mr. Kiselev, we have prepared this report on the regulation of the Russian wheat export during COVID-19. Next slide, please. The main problem is that in Russia, we note inefficient trade policy, which leads to imbalance of interests. And amid COVID-19 and as a result of depreciation of the Russian ruble, by March 2020, Russia saw very low wheat prices compared to the international ones, which entailed the threat of too big imports of wheat. And therefore, we saw a threat of shortages of wheat in the domestic market. And besides, we saw very high wheat price volatility. And the Russian Union of the Wheat Producers applied to the Ministry of Agriculture to introduce an export quota or export duty for the wheat export, which exacerbated the situation for the grain producers and introduced more volatility in the wheat markets in the country, in Russia. As a result, this export duty was imposed from April to June 30, but the quota was exhausted with less than 1 month, to the tune of 7 million tons. And all these problems exacerbated the situation of the producers, exporters, and certainly distorted the market conditions. This resulted in the fall in the attractiveness of the wheat industry in Russia. Next slide. As a result, we started highlighting the policy options which could mitigate the consequences of COVID-19 and the consequences of inefficient policy there. We suggested to take advantage of the Ukrainian experience when special memorandums have to be signed between the state and the wheat exporters or grain exporters. Also, we suggested to actually increase the export duty, but it would be very difficult to come to a consensus. There are more than 400 exporters in Russia, and their interests vary. Also, we offered the export duty, which will not protect the market against excessive exports of grain, because the duty has a very limited effect. Besides, we may also highlight the tariff quota as a measure, as a policy option, which is not so much efficient because it may result in or entail the glut of wheat or grain, which will have negative effects for the grain producers in Russia and would undermine the investment attractiveness. Another policy option would be to abandon quotas and duties. And this measure would be very beneficial from the standpoint of the Russian Grain Union and for the Russian producers, grain producers. Policy option number 5, it could be the budget support for wheat consumers such as poultry farms and the population whose real incomes dropped dramatically in Russia. And it would be the support of the demand that would have a targeted effect for the consumers due to the lack of continuous support in favor of those agents who are not covered by any public program. Policy option number 6 would be about the support of market and transport infrastructure, security systems for wheat transporters. As these measures were aimed at mitigating the consequences of COVID-19, and items 5 and 6 of the policy options would be very beneficial for all the stakeholders who are considered by the case. It would be beneficial for the producers and for the wheat consumers in Russia. Next slide, please. As the main policy recommendation, we suggest to abandon any restrictions in the wheat market and to shift the stress from export measures to providing aid and help for the most vulnerable groups of people and to support the logistics and transportation infrastructure in order to balance the interests between the different stakeholders in the Russian wheat market. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sanat, for that very good presentation. It's a very complex and detailed study. I read it with great care. I don't say that I understand all the economics of it. So I think people may need to have to think about your presentation quite a bit before they can come up with some interesting questions. So I'd ask you to keep your eye on the chat box for any specific questions, if you don't mind. And because we are getting a bit short of time, and thank you very much for the presentation, keep your eye on the chat box for any other questions, and let's move on to our 6th presentation, which is from the Kyrgyz Republic, and it's the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on livestock farming in a specific region in Ak-Talaa district of the Republic. And that was conducted by Nurila Ibravea. And I'd ask Nurila, please, to start the presentation right now. Thank you.
Добрый день всем участникам вебинара.
Good afternoon, all the participants. I will speak about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on livestock farming in Ak-Talaa district of Kyrgyz Republic. This district was selected for the case study due to the fact that it is a highland and the working age people, more than 50% of the population, are doing the livestock farming, and they are doing farming for their own consumption. We may note a very high poverty level. More than 30% of the people have to be supported by the social welfare and have to receive social benefits. This region also has a very low birth rate and the growth in the population due to the harsh climate conditions, unemployment, and outflow, meaning that people migrate to the capital of the Republic for work. We have prepared a questionnaire, and we did phone interviews with the farmers, with those who buy and resell the livestock, and with the representatives of different agencies and pasture committees and veterinaries. We questioned 30 people, and also we did an overview of the scientific literature as to how COVID-19 may affect the agriculture and livestock farming and food security.
По результатам опроса фермеров и всех значит,
The survey of farmers and all respondents produced key challenges encountered during the pandemic. This is a remote region and closure of cattle and animal markets and remote location from the capital resulted in a loss of income for livestock farmers. During the lockdown period, the price of seeds and animal fodder went up. The same applied to food price. Now, the region has about 8,000 households, and here is the average number, the average size of the herd per household. Now, to address these issues, we came up with a number of policy options. First of all, we wanted to suggest improvements in feed management. To achieve this, we have to protect grazing areas from degradation. We have to control weeds. We also need to put more effort into breeding programs because productivity is fairly low. We also suggest using modern feeding technologies and engage not only in grazing livestock production, but also to employ other techniques and approaches. In order to expand access to livestock markets, we suggest to think about processing capability. Farmers are forced to sell live animals, and this results in a loss of 40% of incomes because livestock goes to mediators, go-betweens. So we suggest that a modern slaughterhouse should be built that would meet all the modern standards and requirements of the customs union. Now, the slaughterhouse should have a capacity of 50 heads of cattle and 100 heads of sheep. This would create additional jobs, some 40 to 50 jobs. And the investment cost would be around 50 million sums. The slaughterhouse would have its own lab to check quality of produce and a quarantine facility for the animals. Now, here are the options that we come up with, and they will help create a value chain whereby we'll be able to not only produce meat, we'll be able to process leather, wood, and finally, we'll be able to export the products. Now, this picture at the bottom of the slide shows you a new route that we plan to employ. A new road is being built, and this is an area close to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, which means that we will be able to penetrate some new markets.
Nurila, can you wrap up in the next 30 seconds?
Yep.
Policy recommendations. We suggest that pasture infrastructure be further developed. Local seed farms should be supported. We should enhance breeding and provide subsidies. All this will benefit all the key stakeholders. This would mean higher productivity for farmers. For the administration, this would mean creating new jobs and poverty reduction. For veterinarians, this would mean more work in terms of vaccinations For pastures, this would mean less load and less compacting. And for the population at large, for rural population, for the vulnerable populations, this would mean higher living standards and better nutrition. Now, the key message for policymakers is as follows. We suggest to focus on government subsidies, and we suggest to introduce a ban on exporting live animals. Neighboring countries, such as Uzbekistan, demonstrate huge demand for cattle, for meat, and the meat prices recently have increased dramatically. Besides, we think that we should develop e-commerce and online trading. This is something that has been missing in this region. Other regions attempted to do some e-commerce, and I think that a platform could be developed for this particular region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narila. I don't think I could imagine a wonderful debate and discussion regarding export bans for livestock, particularly with regard to the previous presentation we had on wheat markets and exports and open trading on the previous case study. But we don't have time to go there. I'm very sorry. I'm going to have to go to the final presentation straight away, but thank you very much for your very informative presentation and report. So we'll go to the final presentation on the impact of COVID-19 on Armenian fruits and vegetables sector from Naira and Elena. And please stick to time because we're almost out of time and we've got a few other speakers after this presentation. Thank you. Is Naira going to be the presenter for this one?
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. Do you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it, Naira.
Let me make it more. So good afternoon, colleagues. Today I would like to present the research results that we gained together with my colleague from Lomonosov Moscow State University and Elena Belova. And our research was dealing with COVID-19 impacts on the Armenian fruits and vegetable sector. And the aim of our case study was to propose policy measures and formulate specific recommendations to overcome the negative impacts in long and short-term perspectives in the fruits and vegetable sector. And as you see, we identified a number of important policy issues that included logistical disruption. Interesting discovery was that among many other problems related with immobility and logistical restrictions, for example, fruit and vegetable exporters, Armenian exporters also dealt with increase of price at the borders, and that was specifically because of COVID, because they were not allowed to leave their vans, and they had to pay additional costs for having intermediary brokers for dealing, for negotiating and making transactions at the borders. As for the input constraints in the agricultural field, ironically, even because of even taking into account that the fuel prices reduced significantly, at the same time the fertilizers and seed prices increased significantly, which created huge problems for agricultural business makers and farmers. And there were also a number of other problems. And here are some of the policy options that we recommend, which include immediate policy options such as bridging logistical gaps, such as, let's say, green corridors for fruits and vegetable production, delivery, or implementation of electronic and transactions and deliveries, as well as we are also considering improvement of access to inputs. And here we can see it the development in several venues, including development of a national seed production systems, which has its own benefits such as job creation, independency, and in long run, and also the development of the sector, but at the same time which required a lot of initial input, financial and technological inputs. And also another consideration can be importation of high quality seeds, but which can resolve the issues immediately, but not probably in the long run. Among other policy options, we're also considering improvement of processing sector for fruits and vegetables, such as drying, frozen, canned production, also consolidation and centers for fruits and vegetables. And this is very actual because in Armenia, 96% of all agricultural production is performed by very small farmers, and which do lack financial and technological means to compete with the big farmers, both inside the country and outside it. And also we consider on the background of all this acceleration of digital transformation. As a policy recommendation, as I said, we see several venues of seed development seed production system in the country. One of them, which we consider that can also be viable for the country, is development of seed production within Eurasian economic integration framework, which will have its benefits of using financial and scientific potential of the region, and also will reduce the risks related with importation, especially this, which is very important consideration during crisis situations, when imports are when exportation can just be banned from countries who used to export seeds and other important production. We also see important for the country to accelerate national digitalization programs, and these unprecedented mobility restrictions that were accelerated the importance of distance and digital solutions during this COVID period, bolded the importance of digitalization and e-technologies that can also be applied in agriculture, both on on-farm and off-farm levels, in single or multiple agricultural platforms. This can also include this kind of developments such as e-extension services, which can be highly important, especially during pandemic situations such as COVID, for solving emerging social problems, raising awareness, and also promoting access and the delivery of perishable products in B2B and B2C business models.
Quickly, please.
Yes. So our final policy messages is that these policy directions are good, but we have to take into account several considerations. For example, for seed production, this is establishment probably of a reserve fund and harmonization of a legal environment, and also in the digitalization venue, consideration should be be taken for lack of knowledge in digital technologies, which is currently in the country, and lack of sufficient hardware and software, and also psychological readiness of the population. This is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naira, and I'm sorry for cutting you short, but you were running a bit over time. And my aim is to try and wind up the webinar in the next 10 minutes maximum, because we are now 5 minutes over time, and I apologize to everybody. If anybody has hard stops, my apologies if you've got to go to other meetings. But we do want to finish with some words from 3 people who have been really instrumental and a powerful support to this case study program. And they're going to say a few words on lessons learned and impressions on where we are in the case study program. And they are Derrill Watson, professor and department head at Tarleton University in Texas, USA, Roman Ramoshkin, ECFS Deputy Director, and Pavel Sorokin, Professor at Russian State Agrarian University. So with those 3 colleagues, I'd like them to put their cameras on, come online, and a couple of minutes each, please, from your own individual perspectives, give us your thoughts on where we are in the case study program so far and any ideas for the future. But it's only going to be a couple of minutes each, please, because then we need to get into closing remarks. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Spasiba. Welcome, everyone. The case study methodology that ECFS and the World Bank are pursuing is in part brainchild of Peer Pinstrup Anderson, whose ideas of social entrepreneurship were designed to not only inform students, they were designed to improve the teaching throughout the world, but here in ECFS to improve teaching in the region and to help students become not just learners, but leaders who take ownership of these particular problems and go out and do something real about them. To that end, these cases are currently being used worldwide. They're being used in Colorado, in Texas, and in New York, few states that I'm aware of, Denmark and in Finland, in Nigeria and South Africa, in India and China, to say nothing of the region itself. In January, we had a training, and many of our graduates from the January training were here today. It's always good to see you again, specifically on how to teach using case studies. This has a remarkable potential for helping students deal with real world problem solving and the kind of training that Lev Vygotsky put forward back in the 1930s. I want to particularly commend the authors of these cases. Past cases have focused, there's a short section at the end of each case that says what they recommend students do. And typically authors have said, come up with policy options. Oh, thank you for handing me a set of policy options. I'll copy and paste them. Whereas these authors have gone well above and beyond to suggest further avenues for research, to suggest role-playing activities, and to really encourage and teach teachers through their cases how to make better use of these cases in the classroom. And I think they've done a wonderful job with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Derrill. Roman, would you like to come on?
Thank you, Jonathan. Коллеги, ну, прежде всего, пользуясь случаем, я хочу поблагодарить.
Distinguished colleagues, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the presenters for very rich and in-depth presentations. And I also thank the participants for very exciting and to-the-point questions. That's exactly the approach we need with respect to our case studies, and it fits very well with the format of this event. A few words about outcomes of our exercise that we've been following over the past 6 years. So far, we have published 4 papers in Russian and English, and these are available on our website. They all comprise some 22 cases.
Вот, скажу лишь о
I will
том,
not speak about the organizational campaigns, but as Artavas said in his presentation, his intervention, we are using the Cornwall University methodology. And therefore, the case is not just about the publication or research. This is also a methodology which is being used for an intensive analysis of the food security issue. It allows to come up with the issue, with a question, and is aimed at developing the recommendations and resolutions proceeding from the interest of the main stakeholders of that process. As of today, thanks to our joint together with the World Bank initiative, the case-based research becomes very much popular in the curricula and the research programs of the Eurasian academia. We not only prepare the cases, but starting from that year, we started doing trainings on how to use the cases in the premises of the Moscow State University. And we can say that our work has acquired a systemic nature. We brought together the researchers and the professors from the Eurasian academia who gladly use the cases in their work. We certainly would like to extend this our faculty community, and we will actually replenish the data bank of cases. As far as I'm running out of time, I would like to conclude my intervention. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Roman. It's great to see you again, by the way. I'm sorry that we haven't met this year. Hopefully soon. Pavel, would you like to give some remarks, please, on what we're learning? Is Pavel online, or are there some connection difficulties?
Pavel, I think your mic is up. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, okay. Now, I think, you know, that is quite advantages of be the last speaker, because practically all points, you know, I prepared in my note have been expressed by the other experts and Artavas and Jonathan. And my last hope was Roman, but still, you know, he also stolen my idea, one of my ideas. Anyway, what I would like just to a little bit, you know, clarify or strengthen. We, the center is running seminars, webinars, and so on case using and writing. That's what I wanted to say, that we have to continue it, but probably, you know, with more emphasis on the writing components. I mean, using a case is okay, but to use this technology, you have to have a good cases and learn how to write them. And secondly, this idea also was expressed by probably Artavas, that this fostering collaboration between researchers and the research, that is very important, and it is very important result and very encouraging result. And I have had a chance to communicate with the former rounds participants of the project. And, you know, I am pleased to observe how they stay in touch with each other. It's a kind something of alumni. Maybe, you know, there's one day there will be going to be a group of the graduates of this course. Once again, thank for all the participants, all the organizers from the center and World Bank, which made such an interesting endeavor possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pavel, and sorry for cutting everybody's time, but you realize that we're now over time, and it's I get a D- for moderation and timekeeping. So my apologies to everybody. We're just going to close now. If Professor Sergey Shoba is still with us, Sergey, would you come online and just say a few words of closing, please?
Спасибо, Jonathan. Ну, я бы хотел бы...
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'd like to thank the speakers and especially the team of the World Bank for the work which they have done. I'd like to thank the participants in our webinars who joined the discussion of that topic. Certainly, this topic is quite specific in the sense that it arose all of a sudden. All the countries run into the pandemic, and certainly the pandemic affects our life, all the sides of our life, but it affects the food security most of all. Our colleagues, our speakers, they managed to analyze this problem within a very brief period of time, and their research turned out to be quite profound. They offer very specific policy options how to mitigate the ramifications of COVID-19. I think that this is our main target, our main achievement, that we managed to react very promptly to the issue and to express our messages or options how to mitigate the negative consequences of COVID-19. I think that we'll have still some time to improve the material a little bit, to edit it, and in the short period of time we'll publish the materials, we'll publish it on the website, and we'll be able to use the cases in the practical and scientific purposes. I would like to wish to all our speakers to bring their cases to the ultimate end, and I think that these materials would be very popular in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Shoba, for those encouraging words. And as Director of ECFS, thank you for your encouragement and continued oversight of this program. Really appreciate that. And now I would like to ask Frauke, first of all, saying thank you very much for staying with us through the entire webinar. It's been very good of you, although we've run over time. I'm sure you've got many other important things to do, but it's really appreciated that you've been with us today. And so I'd just like to turn it over to you, please, for some closing remarks from the World Bank. Frauke, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. And thanks for everybody and the really interesting presentations. And I'll be brief because we're already out of time. There's plenty of things one could start discussing and thinking about, because I think what the case studies do is really kind of stimulating our dialogue and so what. From the World Bank perspective, COVID has really put the spotlight on agriculture and food security issues that, challenges that were there before, and that there's needs for solutions. There's needs for solutions now that, what we're calling building back better. And looking at not just agriculture, and a lot of the presentations have pointed that out, but looking at the broader food system, because there's issues in logistics and trade and nutrition, in various, policies that have implications on, how production is being done. So I think these are really, important questions that are being asked, and, to assure the researchers, these are questions that other countries grapple with as well, and where other countries are also trying to find solutions. So these are really very timely discussions. So what we're trying from the World Bank to think, as I said, is really looking at the food systems and finding solutions that simultaneously support healthy people, a healthy planet, and healthy economies. to be resilient and sustainable in all of the approaches that we're having. So the call is on all of us to contribute to make that happen, so that we're finding solutions that don't have a negative impact on any of these aspects that we're concerned about. So thanks again to everybody. It was a pleasure participating, and I look forward to hearing more about the partnership and the work that the ECFS is doing in these regards on food security. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Frauke. That was the final word. So I'm not going to elaborate any further. Just to say thank you to the presenters for all their hard work. The past presenters who have built up that bank of knowledge, and to anybody who is listening who would like to make an application for either a course at ECFS in training in this methodology, or to put in an application to conduct a research project for a case study next year, that will be great as well. So keep in touch with ECFS, please, and thank you everybody for their participation. So let me just say everybody's dismissed, and have a very good rest of your day and keep safe. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jonathan.
It's been a pleasure, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, Sergey. Thank you.
Bye now.
Okay,
Bye.
everybody. I've got to go as well.
До свидания.